this, can we kind of go over overclocking for those of our viewers out there that actually don't know much about it?
Sure.
Okay, so my layman's understanding of overclocking typically revolves around buying an unlocked skewed processor and then just changing the CPU multiplier. I know back in the day you could basically change the system clock and that would just force the whole system to run faster.
Yep.
Back when you had to worry about locked CPUs. Of course there was other tricks too depending on the CPU you had with graphite pins and the like, so you could force them to be unlocked. But let's talk about extreme overclocking. So I can see that you have several different components happening right now, and in fact Hero actually is using a hairdryer versus what I would normally see, maybe a blowtorch, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about why you need to have an extreme overclocking setup like this to reach the frequencies to which we're breaking today.
Okay. I kind of like to equate it to the same thing as drag racing, right?
Okay.
So you've got your normal car you drive down the street, and you've got your extreme car with all the extreme components. So we're doing the same thing with this. We're overclocking the engine by enhancing the engine by you know, throwing very high-end parts at it.
Okay.
We're instead of throwing more petrol into the engine, we increase voltages, etc. So it's a very similar concept. In this situation, in an extreme situation, the key is voltage and the heat of the CPU. So as we increase the voltage, the heat of the CPU goes up, and if we're just using air, it either has negative impact on performance, as in lower clocks, lower CPU frequency, or it just kills the chip from heat. All right, so as soon as we take it colder, you know, 0 degrees, minus 20, minus 30, minus 100, the performance increases. So
the performance envelope, the potential performance increases, right? Because you're dissipating so much more heat by starting at such a low temperature.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and it also then allows us to throw more voltage in without killing anything.
Okay.
So instead of running on air, we might use 1.3 volts and a frequency of 4 gigahertz.
Right.
We can use 1.8 volts and a frequency of 6.5 gigahertz.
Wow.
So we're getting, you know, 50%, 75% overclock, but we're also using 50%, 75% more voltage to achieve that.
And I kind of want to put that in perspective for viewers out there. If you're overclocking, I would say you don't normally want to go past 1.3 volts if we're talking about the voltage core. So that's super impressive to jump up 0.5 volt on top of that by using the LN2 to actually give you that that ability. That's phenomenal. Now, just in terms of maybe the more the terminology involved, right? So LN2, liquid nitrogen. You also use liquid helium if you want to go even crazier. Both those things require very special equipment and very special, I guess, recognition for what you need to worry about using each one of those elements, right?
Yeah.
And then we have the pots, right, which are the large, usually copper or aluminum, I want to say.
Mainly copper, yeah.
Mainly copper is what you want, right? A copper pot.
Yeah.
And then it's basically just physically holding that liquid nitrogen in place.
That's right.
Over the CPU or the GPU or the like.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, I'm guessing Hero has a pot over the CPU as well as a pot over the memory.
Yeah. So Hero's trying to go for the memory frequency record.
Okay.
So one of the stages here in the competition is memory frequency, and the same as the CPU. If you want to achieve the best frequency on the memory, it has to be cold. And it may be a specific temperature. He might need to be minus 155 degrees. At minus 150, it doesn't perform as well, and maybe at minus 160, it crashes and won't boot.
Which goes to the next stage, right? You typically want to raise that temperature. So I've seen overclockers use blow torches and now a hairdryer.
Yeah.
Are there other methods to raise that temperature quickly?
They're the two main ones, and they use them for different things. So a blowtorch is only to go into a pot. So it raises the temperature very quickly and allows you to continue on your session. Whereas a hairdryer might be for the motherboard. So
you don't want to melt the motherboard with a blowtorch.
Yeah. So he's got a lot of ice on his motherboard, and something might stop memory working. So he hits it with the hairdryer.
Okay.
Or his memory might have a little bit of water in the slot, so he hits it with the hairdryer to get that out. So it's specific things for a specific use case.
So that also brings me to maybe the next step in terms of definitions. That looks like they're using the towels that you would use, the disposable towels you'd use in a shop, right?
Yeah.
A garage, let's say. And they're using that because I'm assuming that would also absorb the over spillage of liquid nitrogen, and also keep the vapor from condensating on the motherboard, right? Because moisture, as Vivi was explaining to us, it can potentially ruin an overclock or a system setup.
That's right. We do two main things. Hero's done two main things on his board. He's protected the board with grease, so if liquid does get onto the board, it should just sit on top of the Vaseline or some sort of dielectric grease.
Nice.
The second thing he does is, when he mounts the pot, he tries to make an airtight seal.
Okay.
That way, if there is moisture or you're in a humid environment, it can't get into that CPU area.
Oh,
so
right.
It doesn't really matter if it gets on the board and it's Vaseline, but in the CPU socket is a big problem.
Okay.
So he's tried to make an airtight seal and then put all that paper around there to block air and pick up any liquid that comes down.
So I'm going to define some other terms that you said earlier. So dielectric, my memory serves, is something that does not conduct electricity, and on this particular case would mean water is obviously something that would conduct electricity.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you put a dielectric on it to, one, safeguard it from water touching it, and also two, maybe the grease, and for whatever reason, is keeping the water from conducting across the bus lines themselves, or exposed bus.
Exactly. So
right?
it's mainly just Vaseline.
Okay.
So we just get Vaseline and a paintbrush, and literally sit there and paint the board like you would a piece of paper. So and we just, on a board like this, that's the small board that's getting so covered in cold vapor, the whole board's covered in grease.
So I've noticed something else that Hero's done here. It looks like he's using a PCIe ribbon to run to a very old video card. I actually can't tell which model that is just by looking at it. That could be a 450, a GTX 450.
It's very old, yeah.
But when you consider the stage that we're on currently, the world, I should say the Overclocking World Cup, when you get to this level, apparently, it's not always about the video card performance, depending on the overclock that he's going for right now. So, to your knowledge, what is Hero aiming for right now? Is he going for memory?
He's going for memory frequency, and what he's noticed here is his PCI Express slot gets full of ice. And he's tested this many times, so he knows his PCI Express slot's full of ice. Okay. And he knows the video card's not important to this setup. So you'll notice all the guys that are running this system, they're running the PCI Express riser ribbon out of it in an area of the board that is furthest away from the cold. Nice. So, and it doesn't matter, he could use any single card he wants, as long as it's not going to interfere with the system. So it's old benchmark he's running, CPU-Z, no video performance, so he's just picked whatever card he's got laying around at home.
Nice. Something else I've noticed that Hero isn't doing that I've seen in the past, and in fact APAC is doing it, which is running a 120mm fan to blow the vapor off so that you have less likelihood of condensation on the board, right? Yeah. That's the meaning for that? Yeah. And go ahead, please continue.
So there's two train of thoughts. One is in a humid environment to keep everything frozen, and to let the vapors just come down and freeze. Because if it's cold and vapor can't turn to water, there's no issue. The other train of thought is to have the fan blowing it away and keep it dry to start with.
Okay, I see, I understand now.
And it can be a strategy thing. Somebody might think, I'm only running for 2 hours, I'll let it freeze. And the other guy goes, no, I want my platform to be perfect, so I'm going to keep the vapor, off of it.
Moving off of it, right? Like to say, he'd had 4 hours downtime and have to do another round later on.
That's right.
He would want it to keep as dry as possible because he doesn't ever want it to become liquid again.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Perfect. Now, in terms of what we've been seeing so far, how are the two gentlemen doing?
They're both focusing on 2D benchmarks. So Hero's doing memory validation and APAC's doing 32M, and they've both run the whole time, and they're slowly building their systems up. So far everything's good. We're only about half an hour into the competition now, and both are slowly working it up. So it's very difficult to just go straight to the top score. Right. And they're both running very solid so far.
Excellent. Well, that's fantastic news. One very small question I have actually left, which is I've noticed that depending on the setup, there's several washers between a final screw nut that holds down the pot. Is the reason for that to keep your fingers from freezing when you're touching them to unscrew it later, or is it just?
It's pressure. So depending on the pot.
And, that's a spring, actually.
It's spring,
Oh, I couldn't see it from this distance.
It's a spring. So some guys run without springs, some run with, and everybody has their own mounting technique. Right. And everybody's got different pots. Right. There's 5 or 6 different pot manufacturers, and they've each got 2 or 3 models. So, and it's personal preference. Like I run without springs. These two guys have springs, and that mount pressure can also affect the performance of your chip. And then also the thermal paste you're running under it can impact the mount pressure you put on. So it's just finding what works for you and sticking with it.
Wow. So then I have one final question then. I would imagine, because they're metal springs, that the temperature affects the tension. Is that the case as well?
Yeah, you'll find after you're running for half an hour, it's loose, but most won't retighten it. They'll tighten it once. When they get cold, they'll go loose, but they'll leave it. It works, and people have had issues when they do retighten it. So,
okay. Because maybe you didn't screw it all on effectively the same number of turns, and as it warms back up again, the tensions are now much more on the board?
Yeah, it could be, and it could, that up and down of temperature and then more pressure might mean there's more pressure on going straight onto the chip, and that can mean negative performance, etc. So,
right. Or possibly even maybe, let's say that liquid nitrogen got down to the board level, possibly a broken PCB.
Yeah, it could mean anything like that. So a lot of these lessons are just learned from personal experience, and people, Hero's got a method that works for him, and he's going to stick with it. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, hey, thank you so much for helping us to understand more about overclocking, James. I really appreciate it. I always want to call you James. I know your name is Young Pro, but I like calling you James for some reason too. So thank you very much, Young Pro. I really appreciate it.